Hello, everyone. It's great to have everyone back on this series today in the Intelligence Spotlight series, where we shine light on the world of open source intelligence by engaging with leading investigators, researchers, and journalists. Each episode dives into their latest investigative work, covering the tools, techniques, and the challenges behind their reports. The goal is to not only discuss significant findings, but to also offer educational insights into how OSINT can be leveraged for uncovering hidden truth. Today, I'm very glad to introduce Tal Higgins, who is an OSINT researcher and analyst known for his expertise in analyzing digital communication trends, particularly in conflict zones. His work often focuses on how the role of social media platforms like Telegram in psychological warfare, especially within the context of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Tal has contributed extensively to understanding how militant groups use these platforms to control narratives and disseminate propaganda to both local and global audiences. His research is highly regarded in the field of intelligence and disinformation. Welcome, Tal.
Thank you for having me.
So, Tal, I've been following your work and I was so curious to know your story. So, what's your story and how you began to enter into the world of open source intelligence?
Yeah, so I actually, growing up in Israel, you're surrounded by violence, terror, war that's constantly surrounding you, and you learn about that through media. And that was always something that fascinated me to try to understand the world around me through the social media platforms. And so I wanted to get involved with that. And so I actually started out, you could say, career in Israeli advocacy, like Hasbara, which is now more of pro-Israel content. That's how I started out, trying to showcase to the world the situation via the lenses of Hasbara. And I did that for about 2.5 years. And I felt that at a certain point, I wasn't really understanding what I was sharing. It felt more that these were just simply talking points that I was learning from somebody else.
Mhm.
And I felt that things were a little bit more complex than the way that we were churning it out. At the end of the day, Israeli advocacy or Palestinian advocacy in the general concept is propaganda, and it has to be short, concise, emotional messages that capture an audience. And I felt that there were so many very, very, big questions to be asked about Israelis and Palestinians and the government and how things were going on the ground that weren't being answered. We were only focusing on the minute little details or the very people about the situation, but not in a great detail. And so I decided that I wanted to shift my focus to making sure that people can become educated on their own. Instead of me telling them what to think, they should be able to come to their own conclusions. Because I thought that, at the end of the day, the general concept is that you have 10 people on the left who are going to be very, very pro-Palestinian. You have 10 on the right who are very pro-Israel. They're never going to shift their opinions unless they do it themselves. And then you have the 80%. And the 80% simply means that whoever gets to them first is who they're going to support. Because once they see a very, very emotional image of a child that has been killed either by the IDF or by a Palestinian or by an Israeli or by any other individual or government or organization, that's what's going to become their core belief. And the only thing that seems to change that is when there's more emotional content viewed from the other side. And so it's kind of this game of who can get to the emotions first. And so I thought that's not the way that I want to educate people. And I want to educate people in a way that I'm not telling them what to think, that they can do that on their own. And so I started giving lectures and discussions on media bias and how to understand that at the end of the day, the media networks, whether that be alternative media or mainstream media, they all have agendas. At the end of the day, they're run by human beings, and human beings have incentives not always to lie, but simply to push a certain narrative about a topic. And so the problem is that people aren't aware of this. I think that a lot of times we want to be spoon-fed information. And so when I'm watching CNN or Fox News or BBC, I assume that everything that they're telling me is true because one, why would they lie? People also have this weird concept that people don't lie that I've seen a lot. Like, you get that, doesn't mean it's true. But also the issue is that then they say, oh, maybe they're biased, and some because they're biased, I won't listen to them. What's important to understand is how do we access this information that's being told to us and know how to decipher the opinions and the narratives within that information and extract the raw information that I can build my story on. For example, if now I'm seeing a story about the war and there's been reports of an Israeli airstrike in Gaza, there might be a lot of discussions around that. Like, was the airstrike illegal? How many civilians were killed in the immediate effects? And so, all that should matter to me as someone who's an observer is I know that there was an Israeli airstrike. I know it happened in Gaza. Reports of XY casualties is based on these people reporting it, and the legal expertise is based off of this individual. And once you have all that information compartmentalized, then it's easier for you to then build an opinion that's based on how you then perceive these different pieces of information. Now, the reason I do this is not because I think that there's one truth when it comes to a lot of things. In the world of mis and disinformation, there really is a lot of the time simply this is either true or false when it comes to specific pieces of information, but there is narratives. And my job isn't to tell you which narrative is true or false, because at the end of the day, narratives are sometimes built on ideologies, they're built on belief systems that can't really be argued, at least from my position as a professional. But if we come at this situation looking at it as the concrete information about what has occurred, then I believe that if you and I are looking at a situation and you and I both have access to the exact same information, we understand the sources of that information and where it's coming from, then you and I can have a much more intellectual discussion of what that means. But first, we need to get to the point that everybody in the room has the same information. And so I started doing that a lot more. Then I kind of shifted a little bit back to activism, but more of dialogue with Israelis and Palestinians for almost 2 years. And slowly that shifted into an interest in focusing exclusively on mis and disinformation. October 7th really was the crux that pushed me to start analyzing publicly and talking with other people of a more professional perspective.
It's truly incredible to see that, and especially with the recent conflicts that started in the Middle East, a lot of news circulating online and a lot of images, and even I think we will discuss that, but the role of AI in that area and why it was so important to fact check all of them, because it produced a narrative that everybody could post anything, and it would be because it was a very emotional moment for different sides, so they would just believe whatever they would see that. So I think for you, what it means that when investigators are debunking information online, and what are the main differences in the types of information we see? Because for a lot of people, it's not very obvious that they hear it's misinformation or it's disinformation or it's malinformation. So what are the main differences in these types of information that consumers consume in online spaces?
So first, we should all understand the differences between these terminologies because sometimes us as researchers use all these terms, but people don't actually understand the differences between them. So we have misinformation, which is then simply put something that all of us do. It's when you see a post and you think, oh wow, that's crazy, and you share it. That's misinformation. When you shared something that was untrue, you didn't do it on purpose, you thought it was true, and your source got it wrong, and you ended up just sharing this information with other people, you've spread misinformation. Misinformation is something that everyone falls for. Disinformation is when it's done purposefully. It's when somebody pushes a fake photo, a fake video, a fake narrative. And what I mean by narrative is they're, for example, saying that they've destroyed 100 buildings in the past 24 hours. No source, nothing. He's just saying this because he wants purposefully for you to get riled up from this information. He knows he's doing this on purpose. That's disinformation. Malinformation is the misuse of information. An example of this is taking somebody's personal information and then publicly showcasing that to other people, which is called doxing. When you take someone's personal information, which isn't meant to be to the public, and then you misuse that and publish it for everyone to see in order to use it for some type of malicious activities. And so those are the differences. Regarding as an investigator, like what does it mean when an investigator debunks information online? Debunking, the whole point of our type of work is to ensure that what you're viewing is real. When I'm in the mindsets of an investigator, I don't care whether it is true or not in terms of my ideology or if it makes me look good or bad. That's not what's important to me. What's important to me is that the information is either real or fake. After that, you as a viewer need to decide how you view that information. And so that is something that can sometimes be very difficult to do because there are times when you find yourself debunking something that causes a lot of harm to either your side or your ideology or your political aspirations. Even maybe there's some type of, you have your own agenda, and suddenly you're going to be debunking something that's going to do a lot of harm to your side. And that's something that we deal with as investigators, but as professionals, we need to overlook that and do our work.
Exactly. I mean, thank you so much for describing it very clearly and very informatively because I was in an event recently. So it was the talk of disinformation and its role in political manipulation. And apparently, there were a lot of experts sitting there, and the whole discussion was around misinformation and disinformation. And it was very hard for them to navigate that in terms of meaning and what kind of information could lie under disinformation, and who are people that actually don't know it as a disinformation, but actually contribute to misinformation. So it was a very confusing ground for everyone. But I think the way you described it, puts it in a very clear picture of how these different types of information could appear online. And then, because you've observed a lot of incidents regarding disinformation, what are some of the most common tactics you've seen in the spread of disinformation, especially during the conflict in Israel, Palestine, and also with Hezbollah in Lebanon?
So one thing that's also interesting that has been to view is that depending on what's happening on the ground, the types of disinformation campaigns will switch. So let's talk about IDF soldiers, for example. A very common theme of disinformation that we viewed is they will take a random photo of an IDF soldier, either someone from years ago or recently was killed, and they will attach a story to it, usually that the individual was involved in a rape or a mass killing, or they leak some information about the army. There is no sources listed, and then they usually add some fake name in terms of like, as a local Israeli, I can already tell that the name is a little off, and that's what they'll publish. But it'll change depending on what's happening. For example, just recently, I noticed that during the height of the IDF's war in Gaza, there was a lot of these stories coming out of soldiers allegedly in Gaza or female soldiers on the border with Gaza who were being raped or sexually assaulted. I've checked almost every single one of these stories and was not able to find any source backing any of them. And now I just started seeing it with Lebanon, of people on the border with Lebanon being raped or sexually assaulted or killed and stuff like that, of soldiers that didn't exist. And so this is something that we're seeing reoccurring with the theme. Another very common theme is the Pallywood scenario, where they will take sometimes movie sets. There was, for example, a really famous one that happened that was shared by Israeli government officials, was they took a Lebanese music video that was talking about the struggle of Palestinians, and it was a behind the scenes clip, and they took that clip and said, here's Palestinians in Gaza faking casualties. Or they took a Palestinian TV show that was filmed in Jenin, which is in the West Bank, and they took a behind the scenes video and said, here they're preparing the Palestinian bodies in Rafah, in the southern Gaza, and that was posted right as Israel was going into Rafah, right in the beginning. So essentially, kind of like priming the audience already that when you start seeing Palestinian casualties in Rafah, remember this behind the scenes video of them faking the casualties. And so that's something that was really interesting to see, that it changes slightly depending on what's happening. It's not always the same. So those who are spreading these forms of disinformation are doing so very much intentionally and trying to change public narrative. It's important to quickly take a side note. You were saying how it was very hard for them to define. The issue in defining mis and disinformation is usually the perpetrator that's hard to define. Because how do you know that they were doing it out of malice or out of, naive? That's something that I never accuse people of spreading disinformation unless I know that they are the person that was the first person to spread it, because it's very easy for them to simply say, I didn't know that it was disinformation. I was just spreading it. I thought it was real. And so it's sometimes very, very hard to then accuse and punish those who are spreading disinformation, because you have to find the source. And sometimes it can be very, very difficult to find out who spread it first. Now, going back to the different themes, now that Israel's already begun with the movement within southern Lebanon with its invasion there, so now we're seeing a lot of reports of mass casualties by the IDF. 1,400 people are fleeing and they don't want to fight. And along with these, people saw these leaks, estimates given by different journalists or different people who allegedly were leaking information without any backing. Videos supposedly of Hezbollah's attacks against IDF troops started being released. So far, almost every single one of these videos are either from October 7th, 2023, from on the Gaza border. Some of them were filmed actually of Hezbollah activities, but in Syria from years ago. Some of them were just completely unrelated from the Syrian civil war. And why does this matter? Like these random little videos, a great example actually happened where somebody was arguing with me that it's quite plausible these leaks from the IDF because I keep seeing videos of all these IDF soldiers being killed. And to prove this, they shared with me a video. It was one that was shot in 1996, and then another video that was shot on October 7th, 2023. Their reaction to me debunking was just to block me. But the point is that this works because these little pieces of information come onto your timeline and it builds a picture. And then so when I, as a disinformation researcher, tell you it's not true, you're like, what are you talking about? I've seen hundreds of videos of Iranian soldiers being killed on the Lebanese border. We essentially have to go deeply into debunking every little thing of misinformation that they've built their narrative on, which is sometimes very, very difficult to do. And so those
That
are the different themes that we see.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, especially the case of Pallywood that you mentioned. It was very trending even before the conflict started. It was trending around every time there was a rocket barrage from Gaza towards Israel, and then again Israel responding to that, and then suddenly you would see these videos popping up online. I think I haven't seen them anymore recently. For some reason they disappeared, or if you know that they still exist, that they are still circulating.
Well, think about it. Right now, the focus is on Lebanon.
Right.
Now that IDF has started a new campaign in the northern part of the strip of Gaza in Jabalia, you're going to start seeing that come up again because that's the
Hmm.
thing. That's where the focus is. I mean, there's no concept of. I think I saw one video where they tried to say that people in Lebanon were faking casualties, but that was it, and it didn't really stick. But Pallywood has, as you said, it has a long history of people saying that they fake casualties. A lot of the times when these videos are shared, the real issue is that if you want to make these type of claims, you have to back them up. Just showing me a behind the scenes video doesn't mean anything. I have yet to see when I see these type of videos, when they're showing behind the scenes, the same person that's being viewed in this behind the scenes is then actually showcased killed in an airstrike afterwards. Like, for example, behind the scenes, you see him dead on a tombstone, and then that's the behind the scenes. And suddenly, 5 days later, Gaza Now, a news organization, posts his photo as dead. That, for example, would be called faking casualties. We don't see that. It's usually just taking out of context clips from TV shows or movies and then putting on them a false contact.
Right. And I think that takes us to another part of the psychological warfare. I wrote a short report a while ago on the use of AI and disinformation, the connections of disinformation with not being spread from one party, but actually supported or help from other parties. The example was an AI image, which was clearly AI, but of course it was shared online on various platforms, showing the one of the air bases in Israel was struck with a rocket and planes, the whole terminal, everything was on fire.
I know what image you're talking about.
Exactly. So then I wrote about it, and afterwards, actually, there was rocket hit, but it wasn't like a significant, and were no evidence or visual evidence to show the damage. But it
Yeah.
spread quite quickly. So I needed to find where this is coming from. And then there was a logo on top of this picture. Of course, it did not appear with the reverse image search across different platforms. So what I did, so I looked at the logo to find where the logo is from. And I found it was actually a Russian news
Mm.
channel on Telegram. And from there, they were actually spreading a lot of disinformation on conflicts that relates to Western allies, particularly. So, but it was a Russian one, and also the post was in Russian, and how that spread there. And I guess that's why I want to ask you, like, how do platforms like Telegram or social media can alter the dynamics of modern psychological warfare?
Well, something that where I work, Fake Reporter, which is a watchdog group that essentially combines both experts and volunteers, which we come together and try to stop the spread of both disinformation, malicious content online, hate speech, as well as stopping these type of campaigns that are sometimes directed on Telegram, is something that we've discussed multiple times. Is that the problem with Telegram or WhatsApp or these kind of like news-based sites on these platforms is that there's no ethics code, there's no journalistic integrity with these sites. They don't have to respond to anyone. There's no one to hold them accountable for the things that they post. If they post something that's false, then all they have to do is delete it once it's been called out, and they can continue on with their day. There's no face behind the accounts. And so when you have these type of accounts, then they can essentially just be reign. And now there has been a little bit of a shift in their privacy settings because of the arrest in France. But they and whatever new platform that will pop up that'll be more secure than Telegram, the problem is because of how secure they are, it's not just the issue. There's plenty of secure platforms that hackers or people that sell weapons or drugs or other things can go on. But what's amazing about Telegram is that it's so easy to use. You don't need to be a whiz. You don't need to download some special program. You go into the App Store and you download the app, and that's it. Now you have access to hundreds of different channels that can post whatever they want. And that's what makes it very, very dangerous. It's the fact that it's encrypted, the fact that there's no accountability when these channels post mis or disinformation that causes panic or causes a strife amongst the population. And it's easy to use. It's also easy to share. All I have to do is press one button. I can download a video and share it onto other platforms. As you said, it's also hard to track. It's not always easy to find out where these are coming from. It's not like there's an automatic by law logo that when you share something from Telegram, it has its credit in it. So if they don't want to be credited with the content that they're spreading when they're spreading disinformation, for example, then they don't need to put their credits. They happen to at that point. But it's a huge issue when it comes to these alternative media sites that don't have any accountability for them.
And also, maybe I think it's time for us to listen from you about and walk us through the process of debunking a piece of misinformation. Like, which steps should aspiring fact checkers take, and what are the responsibility of consumers of information?
One of the things that helps the most is familiarity with the topic. You're not going to see me fact checking what's happening with the hurricane in the United States at the moment. You're not going to see me fact checking the Spanish elections or what's going on currently with the economic crisis in Australia, because these aren't topics that I'm well versed on. And when you're well versed on a topic, it allows you to spot things that are wrong, that are potentially wrong. It also tells you where to look. So, for example, our process at Fake Reporter, where I work and where I do the majority of this type of content, is that on one side we have people who are experts in very, very specific fields. Mine is mainly the information warfare aspect. We have people who are experts in understanding hate speech and incitement and how different groups come together in order to incite against populations or people. And on the other side, we have the general population, volunteers, people who give us tips or give us information. And this allows us to have a wide range of information about almost any given topic within the sphere that we focus on. And it allows us to debunk things very, very fast. If I need something that's in Arabic and I need to do the translations and make sure that what's being said is actually in Arabic, I don't speak Arabic. So I reach out to either one of the other researchers on our team or to one of our volunteers that speaks Arabic and ask him. If we need to know what's going on regarding mis or disinformation within the war, that's usually comes to me because that's something that I focus on almost exclusively with information warfare. And so when it comes to how you do this on your own, the first thing to do is look for a source. When you see a photo or especially reports is a big thing. Like a report says, or the New York Times said, did they actually say that? That's the first thing you should ask yourself. Is this true? Like, what are the telltale signs? So if you see a report that doesn't link a source, they don't tell you where it's from, then I personally would ignore it. Not because it's untrue, but the likelihood of it being true is much, much lower, the fact that they don't provide where it's coming from. And if they say source, like Axios, for example, it doesn't really mean anything. This happened with Axios a few months ago, where there was a report that came out, basically Axios saying that there's going to be, I don't exactly remember, I think it was like an invasion or some massive attack was about to happen, and they never actually posted that. They never said that. It was just completely made up. But people believed it because, suddenly you have the source is the title of some large news organization, so people believe it. When it comes to videos and photos, Google Lens is your friend. Google Lens has some issues and there's more advanced ways of dealing with it, But for the vast majority of the photos and videos you're going to see, it can usually solve it pretty fast. And what does that mean? Is that if someone's saying that the photos from today, put it in Google Lens, and most of the time it'll show you photos that are older. And it doesn't matter actually what the accuracy of the older image is. All you need to know is that this photo was supposedly taken today. I see that it was posted 5 days ago, so it's not relevant to the story. Same thing with videos. Videos, what I would do is that when you can't, a video into Google Lens. So what I would do is take the best shots of the video in Google Lens. Usually what will happen is when they want to make a thumbnail or the first frame of the video that's going to pop up in a video, they'll try to use a good angle. So like take screenshots of different angles in that video because maybe one of them will show up. For example, don't take a blurry image of the fire, wait for the fire to be at its full capacity. It looks really cool. Take a screenshot of that because most likely when it was used in an article, that's what they used as the frame. In general, the best thing is to just be cautious with what you view online, especially with translations or a video that supposedly is dubbed and subtitled. But the way that I would recommend most people conduct themselves online is to be aware of a few things. One, you're not an expert. You don't know everything. None of us know everything. And there's a lot of information that you will not have access to and you won't know how to figure out. The next thing is patience. Things take time to know the full story. In the initial reports of any type of situation, especially a crisis or a massive attack of some sorts, you're not going to have all the information on hand. What do you do now if suddenly all these reports are running out? You want to help, you want to do something, you want to donate, you want to share, you want people to be aware of the fact that this just happened. What I would say is that if this topic is important to you, enough that you want to donate, enough that you want to share, enough that you want to take action beyond just scrolling through and just, oh, that's cool, and just keep on going. If it's enough that you want to do something about it, then do the research and make sure that what you're sharing is true. The way that I would hold yourself accountable is if I sat down with you in a courtroom and I forced you to justify you sharing that video or that post, or you would have to pay me $100 if you can't prove to me that this report or this video or photo is real, then why are you sharing the photo? Why are you sharing the video? Why are you sharing the report? If you don't know if it's true or not, within a reasonable degree, and reasonable doesn't just mean because I think so, but you actually did the research and you tried to find the origin, then why are you sharing it? Why are you sharing things that could potentially do far more harm? Imagine, for example, if you're talking about Gaza, for example, and you'd see that someone posted supposedly evacuation orders for a certain area. And you're like, oh my God, I want to share this. So maybe people who are watching and they should know where their families are in Gaza and what's happening with the evacuation orders, and you share it. Turns out that was fake. Someone just posted Photoshop of a fake evacuation order. And now you shared it, their family saw it, they somehow were able to contact, and they told them to evacuate to the wrong place. Because, oh, I saw the evacuation. Yeah, but we didn't get any evacuation orders. Maybe it didn't get to you. And so you end up sharing, you do far more harm. Or within the state of Israel, and suddenly you see there's reports of this massive attack in Tel Aviv. And suddenly you're calling all your friends, going crazy. Oh my God, like what just happened? Are they safe? Were they hurt? And it turns out there was never any attack. And so you just put friends and families of those people in Tel Aviv in fear for nothing, absolutely nothing. Understand that when you share a post, like a post, when you boost it in the algorithm and when you're giving it to other people, you are causing sometimes real world harm to other people. Be aware of that.
That's quite a statement, I would say, because that's something happening in most places, and especially with the online information consumption, it is so easy to be triggered and to feel emotions when you see an incident happening rather than being in that place. And I think it's true of different places and different conflicts. And also tells us that it not only spreads fear, but also it may cause harm. But also at the same time, do you think are there examples of a political change or maybe a military change of tactic if something spread online and it was maybe against their own tactics and somehow they had to change, or maybe not just a military, maybe on a wider governance political spectrum?
Recently, one of the things that our organization did is we exposed this entire covert operation where they were essentially recruiting people, local Israelis, and telling them to go to this protest and burn a flag. Go here and take a video of a sign saying death to the prime minister. The point of this type of campaign is to create fear and division within the population using external messaging that isn't actually a part of the discourse. And even if it is, there are certain parts of the discourse that we believe shouldn't be there when it comes to violence and hate. But that was something, for example, that recently we showcased that you have external elements for coming into a society that are dealing with their own internal political dilemmas, and they are trying to influence them not based on in a grassroots, local, natural political strife that's occurring, but trying to elicit a certain type of agenda that they want on the local population to cause more division that isn't actually natural within the given population. That's definitely something that we see also with psychological warfare. It's important to understand that everything I'm telling you here about being careful, different governments and organizations, individuals are also doing this purposefully. They want you to spread these images. They want you to spread these photos. They want you to cause harm to the other side by you spreading these things and creating distrust in different organizational structures or distrust within certain individuals or what's happening on the ground. A very, very common thing that we've seen is because of these type of campaigns, and also because of issues that have happened, people are like, I don't trust the media anymore. I don't trust anything. And so what do they do? Because at the end of the day, they want to get information. They go to alternative media, which is the same thing at the end of the day. And what do I mean the exact same thing? It's just on a smaller scale, it's still people with agendas. At the end of the day, they're all pushing a certain type of narrative. Instead of us teaching people and people understanding how to decipher information, these campaigns and examples of mis and disinformation end up pushing everyone to different extremes. Because like, oh, fine, I don't trust anything anymore, and therefore all I trust is this one person now that I'm going to listen to.
Right. And how do you see the role of misinformation evolving in the future and the future conflicts? Do you think as governments are responsible to mitigate it somehow, organizations, or it's just generally citizens that need to prepare for it?
The role of government is not just to protect civilians, in the physical element, but also in the mind. And now this can be very scary, the whole like 1984 and government suppression and authoritarianism. But at the end of the day, one aspect of the government is to protect us also in the online space and not just in the physical space. Now, this doesn't mean that the government gets to decide on the narrative, and therefore this is the only narrative that everyone can speak about. But it's sometimes very, very basic things. For example, legally, if a photo or a video is AI, it has to have that logo, or not, you can be prosecuted for it. That's something that there's no reason to be against that. If something is AI, it should be labeled as AI, and you shouldn't be able to get out of that. I think that, for example, there should be a lot more penalties for people who are actively spreading and disinformation. What I mean by actively spreading misinformation is that, if somebody's constantly spreading misinformation on their page, despite being called out, despite being corrected multiple times, and they show no change, you're spreading misinformation that others are doing, and you're misinformation maliciously. Every time you're called out, you say like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, it was a mistake." But when you persistently do it, it's not a mistake anymore, and it becomes disinformation. I think that there should be some type of laws and protections that lawyers and the government and people who are far better at this in terms of the legal expertise in order to ensure that civilians, the citizens have their protections in terms of free speech and being able to say what they want, but at the same time not allow disinformation to become so much more prevalent. And you mentioned a little bit earlier, but AI is going to be a huge, huge factor in that. I just made a post today discussing, someone showcasing in such a like positive light of in very, very soon from now, you can now be a reporter anywhere in the world. And it shows a pretty realistic woman who's supposedly from CNN giving a news report somewhere. And that's terrifying because in about 10 years, and it won't even take that much time, I mean, I see people fall for AI images that I immediately know are AI, but a lot of people still fall for them. Which is say 10 years from now, they will be able to create AI that will be indistinguishable to me as well. I could be sitting on my couch watching TV, watching a news reporter, just giving the daily rundown of what happened, and suddenly there's shot in the face, and suddenly there's chaos in the background. And all that was because someone hacked the news network at the exact time of the live stream, replaced it with an AI model, and then just riots in the background. What do I do then? Do I flee? Do I run? Do I get a gun? Do I hide in the corner? That's going to be a reality at some point, unless governments make the efforts to stop this from happening. by prosecuting individuals who try to spread this type of information and allow it to become mainstream. At the end of the day, when it comes to technological advancements, there also has to be a moment when we say, let's take pause here. Different intelligence networks around the world are going to use this to the best of their capabilities. Different governments are going to do this as well. But I think we should aspire that democratic society should be pushing for legislation that stops these things from expanding to a wider audience.
I totally agree with what you said because with rise of AI, just generative AI, including audio, video, well, it's still in the development phase, but still it's been used, especially in the conflict with Lebanon. The video of the fire, which part of it was like a few clips merged together, and the first clip was of AI generated, showing the whole city on fire. And it was shared widely across social media and
It
across
was
all
shared
of
by massive accounts.
exactly. And a lot of activists were sharing that too. And I had to like text people that I knew at least that, okay, this part is AI, at least inform them. And for that reason, I guess it's going to be more. It's going to be more of this content appearing online. And there is this saying, a thief is always a step ahead of the police. But in order to not make the distance wider between these two, it's the job of analysts, it's the job of governments to also mitigate that risk and kind of balance it, at least to be able to counter it. So how can you see like analysts can adapt to that and detect and counter these emerging threats?
Well, one part of it is about doing it yourselves, be creating that space. Fake reporter, the reason that it exists, the reason it came into formation was because there was a lack of it. The government wasn't doing anything to mitigate this mass mis and disinformation and malicious content online. There was no organizations doing it locally in Israel in any real capacity. And so we had to create the organization in order to do it ourselves, to fit that place. And we've already gotten to a point where people are much more aware of this stuff. They're aware of the fact that there's mis and disinformation, that there's malicious content online that's created by external forces, that there are bot networks. We are getting to a point where people are being much more aware of the fact that these things exist. But there is also a counter issue here, is that suddenly it gets to a point where everyone who's your enemy is the bot networks, everyone else is spreading disinformation, everyone else is lying. I'm not. This is sometimes an issue where we have as researchers, and this is something that I think that is to be aware of, is that you create a bubble on your feed. And so depending on what content you focus on is how people who follow you are going to see the world. And what do I mean by this? Let's take my own content, for example. I don't speak Arabic. And so every time there are AI or disinformation videos or debates about what was said in Arabic, I don't have an opinion because I can't give my opinion as a researcher, my professional opinion as a researcher. And so people who view my feed, oh, that's not an issue. There's no issue with Arabic being mistranslated or them lying about what was being said in Arabic by this person. And that's a real issue that, for example, I'm missing from my page, which I've tried to mention to people in different threads that, like, listen, this is something that doesn't appear. And we see this on different pages. Something that I see a lot is that there are pages that are very, very much dedicated to exposing Israeli disinformation or Palestinian disinformation. That's the entire point of their pages and their organizations, which is fine. That's what they want to focus on. They want to focus on the other side and the disinformation that they post. But what happens is that, if I'm Israeli or I'm Palestinian, then I'm going to focus on following the accounts that are exposing the other side. One, because it's fun. It's fun to watch the other side, get caught out in a lie and you can go, haha, look what happened to you. But also, I mean, we don't really lie, or when we do it's by mistake. They are doing it systematically, so systematically that they need an entire page dedicated to exposing them. And so I see the remnants of this on my page. Now, I try to focus exclusively on Israel and Palestine when it comes to Israeli officials, Palestinian officials, Hamas, the IDF, any other groups. If you look at my comments on my debunks, for example, if I debunk a pro-Israel activist, then a lot of the comments will be Zionists always lie, caught in another lie, look at them lying, not surprised at all. And then if you go to one of my posts where I'm debunking a Palestinian activist, you'll see the exact opposite. The Palestinians always lie, Arabs always lie, look at them lying again, classic. And it's every single time. And it's so consistent. If you just look at my posts and you'll see the exact same consistency, the exact same messages, just switch out who's responsible. And this is an issue that occurs. And why is this a problem? Is because then it's much harder for you to notice it on your own side, or you're saying, ah, it's not that big of a deal. We don't do it. That's a, their side is they do it systematically. We only do it, by accident. But you notice it's not. The same type of campaigns are run, the same types of misinformation are spread, and it's a lot harder for you to admit when your side does wronghoods when you never see them doing wronghoods according to all these channels. And so that's something that happens with the bubbles as researchers. So I would recommend that it's entirely fine to focus on one topic, whether it be a specific political party or a specific group or a specific side, but be aware of that and make sure your audience is aware of that.
Exactly. And apart from that, there is this risk of falling for it, even if you're a rising fact checker, because sometimes it could put a lot of psychological pressure on you with trolls, for example. Even if you're saying the right thing, or maybe a group of people don't like it, it may troll you. So unless you gain that experience and build that brain muscle to not let that affect you and continue your work. And maybe in our last part of conversation, which is the best rule to handle news on social media, from what you can advise, especially for those who are rising fact checkers or simply interested in doing it?
So it's a really good question, and I think it has a few different elements. When it comes one is to not give into pressure. Don't try to be first. I think that the main thing is that everyone wants to be first. It feels really good first person to debunk a claim, and then you get all the views from it. A lot of people see it, and it gets spread, and it gives you recognition. But the number one thing that's going to kill you in terms of credibility is trying to be first. There are times when I see this is actually important. This is something that we didn't really discuss, is the difference between open source intelligence and also your intelligence. And what I mean by that is that, I'll give an example. I was in Tel Aviv, and suddenly on social media, I saw everyone talking about explosions in Tel Aviv. Tons of explosions in Tel Aviv. There were lots of explosions in Tel Aviv, all these different reports. I was standing in Tel Aviv. There was no explosions. But I can't debunk that. Because based on what? Because I'm in a specific location in Tel Aviv, because I know better. It's anecdotal. And also, how do you verify that I'm in Tel Aviv? I could be lying to you. Oh, I filmed a video. Maybe I just hacked it and I put an old video from 5 years ago. It doesn't mean anything. And so that's something that's very, very difficult sometimes as a researcher, where there are a lot of fake posts, reports, images, videos that I know are false, 100%, but I can't debunk them because there's no way for me to debunk it in a way that allows you to verify what I said. And that can be very, very, very frustrating as a researcher, where I know that what you're posting is bullshit, but there's no way for me to prove that without simply saying, trust me, just trust me. And trust doesn't really mean anything online. If I'm now having a conversation with you off the record, we're just talking with one another, I don't mind opening a little bit more about things that I know or things that I know are false based on my personal experience. But when it comes to me now switching to the public view and people trusting what I have to say, I need to ensure that anybody viewing, if they come up to me and say, can you prove what you said at 2150? I need to be able to prove that. I need to be able to show you something that you can look at yourself. And that's something that's very, very difficult in terms of being first in spreading the truth and trying to get the message out there because you're limited by what is public. And so what I would say to aspiring researchers is that be aware of that limitation. Don't let it take away from the fact that there's a lot of things that you will be able to fact check. There's a lot of the times where there are things that turned out to be fake. I didn't know that they were fake, but somebody pointed out a detail that only they knew about. And so I was able to then find the origin and showcase a source that everybody could agree on. But that is definitely something that is debilitating. As a researcher, that's something to be aware of. That if you want to be a researcher, my number one thing is that if you debunk a claim, you need to be able to showcase evidence and provide a source that anybody else can look at. I don't want to ever hear the word believe me or trust me. Doesn't mean anything as a researcher because you could be right 100 times and then make a mistake on the 101th, and I might end up believing you because I trust you. But I need to be able to verify everything that you say. I've seen this many times where I will make a fact check and then people will write under the comments, why should I believe you? I'm like, don't believe me. Don't believe the thing I have to say. Verify what I wrote. And that's something that is very, very difficult as a researcher to deal with in terms of the internal struggle of you wanting to, you know, correct information and you want people to be aware of factual information, but you simply can't because you can't find a public source for it.
Thank you, Tal, for your time and for giving us very detailed insights and from a very creative perspective and a very modern perspective, I would say. If you want to recommend just one tool for those who are listening, which tool that would be?
I would recommend two tools.
Go for it.
The number one tool that I recommend is Google Lens. I think Google Lens is an incredible tool. And I would recommend following established fact checking sites like ours at Fake Reporter, those that have the already established teams who can provide more insights as you're building yourself as a researcher or trying to understand more information. If you want to volunteer, you can reach out and I'll either provide information or talk about ways to help spread factual information online and ensure that all of us can come to more fact based opinions.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.